Where do you seek forgiveness most from? Do you seek forgiveness from God? Do you seek it from your spouse? Do you seek it? In asking the question, I'll just answer really quickly. I think that I ask for it more. I'll say it out loud in my heart, but I'm actually seeking forgiveness from someone else. I'm not seeking it from God.
That was Brent Travers discussing advice from some kind of poet, which was inspired by Psalm 32. I'm Shep Rosenman. This is The Rest is Commentary, where we discuss what songs inspired by the Psalms inspire in my guests. In addition to Brent, my other guest today is Dan Weidman. Brent and Dan have been friends since college in the early 1990s. Brent went to law school and became a talent manager and television and film producer. Dan opted for corporate communications after journalism school. They share a passion for great storytelling. We discuss reconciliation, forgiveness, role models, things we learn from our kids, and we unpack what it means to pray, whether you believe in God or not, regardless of your faith. Let's start by listening to Advice from Some Kind of Poet. Up all night again, chest tight, mind racing, playing over and over and over our conversation. Creeping light of day, your body grows restless. In moments I know we'll have to have conversation. I love you, pardon me, shelter me. I feel better already. I covered up my sins, embarrassed, distressing, ignoring the fact that we needed this conversation. I love you, pardon me, shelter me. I feel better already. I trust in you, your wisdom too. You tell me, seek inspiration. There's a guy named David. He's some kind of poet. Tells it straight to confess my breach in conversation. Wanna thank you for listening. Sometimes I am just stubborn. My heart shouts in joy when we're in conversation. I love you, pardon me, shelter me. I feel better already. I love you, pardon me, shelter me. I feel better. I feel better. I feel better already with you.
When you approached me about listening to your podcast and participating in it, and would I want to do it with you alone, or would I want to do it with somebody else? And you mentioned how long that we've known each other a long time, and this is going to be I think this is going to go on to our 19th year professionally working together. And my friendship with Dan goes back like 34 years or something. I think that the two of you guys, for me, embody what I think is important in a conversation like this. You're both people who excel in your professional lives. You take your belief system, your religion, very, very seriously. It's a real part of your lives. And for Dan as a Catholic and for you as a Jew, I think it's really interesting because it permeates what I've seen you guys do in terms of how you've raised your families, and I've been witness to both, but also how you guys conduct yourselves professionally. It's not something that you guys just talk about, and I feel like I'm probably the black sheep. I'm probably the biggest sinner amongst the three of us. That's why I wanted the three of us to be in this room together.
So for starters, it inspired connection. Dan, would you mind sharing some of your background here?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I grew up Catholic, went to 12 years of Catholic school. My dad was Catholic, altar boy, the whole thing. My mother was a convert. My mom was actually, oh man, not to get like too into here, but she's sort of Dutch Reformed, that whole thing. And she just, rebelled against all of that, met my dad and ended up like, yeah, sure, I'll convert, no problem.
So she rebelled by leaving Dutch Reform and going to Catholicism.
Yeah, her parents and her grandparents were all very, extremely, serious people. There was no fun allowed. I think my dad offered sort of a breath of fresh air in that. The Catholics were a lot more fun. So anyway, she met my dad. My dad grew up in Milwaukee, and he was, kids were drinking beer at, 14, 15, 16 years old. It was just a whole different cultural experience for my mom, who grew up in Grand Rapids, and my dad grew up in Milwaukee, right across the water from each other. But anyway, so I grew up Catholic, me and my brother, and 12 years of school. And I've been practicing ever since I was, I was baptized Catholic. So it's kind of interesting that we're sitting here with these different perspectives. And I grew up with the Bible, but not in a way that you might think. It was sort of a flyby, when.
What do you mean?
Well, compared to other religions, there isn't a lot of in-depth study of the Bible in the Catholic faith. Unless you seek it out and you're looking for, say, a Bible group where you can, there's a certain passage, or there's we're going to study Matthew, we're going to go from tip to tail on Matthew. Okay. But unless you're into that, you're not going to do a deep dive on the Bible. Certainly not the Old Testament. You'll hear it at Mass, but you're not going to
hear it. Meaning it's read or it's spoken about.
Well, it's part of the Mass. So you'll do an Old Testament reading and a New Testament, Old Testament reading, a New Testament reading, and then one of the Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how the Bible, quote unquote, is typically shared in the Catholic faith every Sunday, every weekend, what have you. When it comes to Psalms, total mystery for me. I know of them. I couldn't tell you, but maybe 2 or 3 of them that I'm familiar with just from kind of growing up. But even then, that might be a stretch. So it was interesting when we brought this up and we started thinking about, the Psalms, and I picked Psalm 32, not because of the Psalm itself, but what you wrote, the song that you came up with. I liked the title. I liked kind of the rhythm of it, and I liked your voice.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But then, and getting into, the meaning of it and the breakdown of, realizing your sin, and then God finding the capacity forever and ever to be able to, forgive. And then Brent and I had an interesting conversation, in the car ride over here about the applicability in our own lives. We were talking about, for example, my daughter who's 17, and right now for that generation, there's this concept, there's even a phrase of, you're dead to me. If someone has wronged you, they just write them off because it's so easy in the social media world that we live in now, and this instant, like, I'm just writing them off. And actually the footnote on that is, in some cases, she has become friends again with some of these, mostly girls, not boys, whether it's forgiveness or just time passes, and time heals wounds, right? So what I've found is, that there's this generation doesn't have much of a capacity for true forgiveness. Now, that could be age and the immaturity of the brain and the teenagers. But I told her, I said, one of the greatest gifts that you can give is to actually forgive someone, whether it's, expressing it exactly like that, or you just let time pass and you recognize in your own mind that somebody said something stupid. They just misspoke.
Yeah.
It was an honest mistake. But right now they're bearing, most kids, and I've read articles about this, most kids, their bearing is, you're dead to me. I hate that. I don't like that. I think that's kind of evil.
How did your parents and their sisters and brothers and aunts and uncles manage this when they had conflict within their family when you were a kid?
Well, in our own house, it's interesting that you bring this up. That's a good question. My mom brought this up recently, that she said whenever there was a problem, we always made a point to sit down as a family and make sure we just aired out whatever needed to be aired out. It's sort of the don't go to bed mad, but don't, as a family, move on to days and weeks and months with anger and resentment and misunderstandings that turn into these mountains, out of molehills. It's not worth it. It's never worth it. And we're a family first and foremost. And so that's what my experience and my learning from more my mother than my father, but definitely my father too, was just, we always had a capacity for forgiveness. It's not like they, beat that into us from a religious standpoint, but it was just kind of who they were. It's who they are. I mean, it's just part of their fiber. So here I am now, fast forward all these years, and I have this 17-year-old. I have another daughter who's 21. That's a whole different, she has a different outlook on life. But for some reason, I don't know what it is, but these kids that are in high school right now, and maybe this is just too sweeping of a generalization, I don't know. True. The social media world has shown them that dead to me, I'm writing you off, I'm moving on, there's always another friend down there some way. It's too disposable.
Right.
And that bothered me. So I've had conversations with her about, now it's probably going in one ear and out the next. But maybe someday this will dawn on her that, oh, you know what? Yeah, maybe I was too quick to judge, or she did say something stupid, or that wasn't right,
This is as true for adults as it is for kids, but the depth of it is more true for teenagers. So at 17, it's very easy to say, you're dead to me, when your friend steals your French fry or whatever stupid thing it was,
sure,
or posted the wrong way about it. But over time, when there's a loss of relationship, and it's a relationship that has the potential for meaning, either your daughter or her friend who committed the offense or vice versa, or was offended, may just wake up and say, I miss you. And I've seen this myself. They move from, you're dead to me, to, do you want to go out to dinner? There's never an apology. There's never an exploration of what was wrong, but they just move on as if nothing happened. And I say they, not only talking about my kids who are 26 and 24 at the moment, but about witnessing this in our own lives. There are people in our own lives who were not part of it for a long time. And then all of a sudden we were invited out to dinner, and now we're back in each other's lives. There's no need to talk about whatever it was that separated us, because it's irrelevant. But talk to me about forgiveness for a minute, because one of the things that we have an opportunity here, because we do come from different backgrounds. So Dan, you grew up Catholic. Is there a distinction between Irish Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, and anything else? It's all kind of the same?
In the modern era, no.
Okay. What did you grow up, Brent?
I went to Baptist elementary school. I went to Lutheran junior high school, and I went to a Church of Christ law school. The Baptist was definitely it felt more evangelical. Upon reflection, was more evangelical. There was a lot of song and a lot of praise, and what we were learning was always kind of very God-centric and Christ-centric. I felt that the Lutheran junior high was definitely, that's an offshoot of Catholicism, really, anyways, in a way.
Lutheran's
right?
Closer to Dutch Reform, is it not?
I think it might be, because it was European, Martin Luther, right? That's another podcast.
It felt a little bit more academic and less kind of the warmth that the Baptist had. And then when I went to a Church of Christ law school, it wasn't really in your face. I had the choice to engage with it or not, but I chose to engage it. I actually had left my religion behind for quite a long time. And then I re-engaged and then found that religion again when I went back to law school. And then I was going to Bible study, and I was participating in those events. Religion was not a part of my daily life at home. We did not discuss God. We did not discuss Christ. In the latter years of my mother's life, we had a Bible in the house that was by her side. I don't think I ever opened a Bible.
Did you go to church?
We went to church. I went to church with my parents for weddings and funerals. My parents, in my entire life, never went, let's get up and go to church and let's go do that. That was never part of what I was. But however, at the same time, I don't think that it made them any less Christ-like in a way. I mean, there was love, there was forgiveness, there was opportunity, there was encouragement, all the things that, I think all the things that you would hope to have that are taught are things that I still think that I gained from my parents. I don't feel like I don't think I was cheated out of something. It was something that I was on a path. And by the way, my parents supported me. Like I was very religious when I was in junior high and especially in elementary school. My parents were very encouraging.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I had to study Bible verses. I had to memorize them and stuff like that. My parents were super supportive of all of that stuff.
Did they study it with you?
Nah, not that I can ever recall. I studied the Bible a lot as a kid. I mean, it was something that, and I was really into it. Like I thought I was really into what it taught and the history of it, but also the teachings of it. It was something that it was like my favorite subject when I was in elementary school. It's something then dropped off. And then as I became like a young adult and it was in college, and then I walked away from it, and then it came back to it in law school, and I embraced it all over again. Like, it was something that I really loved about being. I went to Pepperdine. It was something that I really loved. Was that it was there for the taking if you wanted it, and I fully embraced it. Prayer has always been something in my life, and when I tell some people that, people who don't know me as well, they're always really shocked by that. I am somebody who finds a lot of solace in those personal moments, especially in times of strife, of which you both have been witness to. It's something that I do quietly. It's not something where I'm necessarily kneeling on the side of the bed.
Well, what does it look like for you? Instead of telling us what it's not.
Well, sometimes it's just lying in bed and putting my hands across my chest, and I actually put one hand on my heart and one hand on my stomach, and I lie in bed and I'll do it. And sometimes it's when I'm driving, and I find I pray a lot when I drive. For me, it's an important part of my life. I haven't carried it over to the home. It's not something that I've not brought into the household so much, and it's probably something I should do more. My son's not religious at all, but
what's the should? Why should? I'm going to come to you next. Don't worry.
You're totally ready.
The reason for that is because I think that at the very bare minimum of it is that you get an incredible moral training. Not that I'm the most moral person in the world. God knows that I'm not. But I think that it's the integrity and it's the morals that I think that I benefited so much from being sent to religious school. Those are the things that we're taught. But I try and teach those things to my son. I think he's actually living a good life that way. They do something at his school, which I think has been really powerful. And I have to say that I've learned more about forgiveness probably in the last few years of him being at his school than almost anywhere else. Because they do this little thing where and it started with him in the first grade, where they say, "Can we start over?"
Wow.
And I cannot tell you how many times Valentina and I, even in the teenage years, have gone, "Can we just start over?"
That's powerful.
And then you hug, and we hug and say, "I love you." And then you just move on. And that to me it takes away some of in my mind, it strips away some of the ego. It strips away some of the pride in being like, in saying, "Will you forgive me?" Or "Can I have your forgiveness?" Or whatever. It just say, can we start over?
Yeah.
So it's not laying blame on anybody. It's just going, can we both agree to forgive?
Well, there's no judgment. There's no judgment. There's no rehash of anything. It's all about the future, and it's about us.
And the agreement is once you do it, it's over.
So this is when there's conflict between, say, two kids at the school.
Two kids at school, but I do it with him. We have it.
Yeah, that's actually a beautiful thing.
We have it.
I love that.
And we have it, and we've done it as father and teenager, and it's been a wonderful tool for us to be able to use and go, can we? And I find myself as a 50-year-old man going, "Can we start over?" And I'm saying it to a 13-year-old kid, and I'm like, he's like, "Yeah," and I'm like, and I cannot tell you the relief I have, the physical and mental and emotional relief I have when he's like, "Yeah, okay."
Look, a lot of it has to do with the 2 or 10, however many people are involved in a conflict, choosing to trust each other. Because anybody can say, "Can we start over?" But you need the other person or people to actually play.
Right.
And so your son has learned that lesson because it's being reinforced in school and at home. And so even if, you've learned it from your son or your son's school, it's a fabulous, fabulous construct. And by the way, I don't know enough about what this is like in the Baptist world, but I do know a little about the Catholic world. You start over when you say your Hail Marys or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. There's a ritual process that, in order to be entitled to start over with a clean slate, I mean, maybe there are things you can't start over from, but there's a process baked into the structure where you confess.
Yes.
And then you undertake this action and you get to start over. Forget absolution. I don't care about absolution, right?
No, that's not relevant.
But you get to start over. And that's a place where Catholicism and Judaism are very similar. We have a concept called vidui, which is essentially confession. You can only repent in Judaism if you first acknowledge your mistake, second, you commit to never doing it again. Now, it doesn't mean you don't do it again. The last step is, and you don't do it again. But in the moment when you say, I commit to never doing it again, you have repented. If you're a serial offender of the same thing over and over again, well, then it's not a true repentance. Mm-hmm. But in that moment, you get to do it. And again, in the Jewish construct, we say vidui. There are those of us, if you pray in a kind of Orthodox or traditional Jewish way, you say a version of vidui every day, the confession, every day. Mm. But even if you don't do that, at a minimum, you're doing it from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. There's 10 days where you say vidui a lot. You'll see Jews hitting their breasts, saying Ashamnu, Bagadnu, and it's a list of all the things you've done wrong, or the al chaitz on the various sins or mistakes you've undertaken. And then you do it again right before you die. There's a vidui where you confess. And it's a formula. Why? Well, in theory, because in this moment of crisis where you're meeting your maker, you're not going to know what to say. You're going to be overwhelmed by all the things that you might have done wrong. Now, it doesn't mean you didn't do things right too, but in that moment, you may be overwhelmed by what you did wrong and a feeling of guilt. And so the rabbis wrote a formula. Here's what you say. Boom, 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 boom. Brent gave us a little bit of what prayer looks like for him. It's like a yoga move, hand on the chest, hand on the belly. You're connecting two different parts of your life, your foundation with your soul, if you will. Chakras, I think might be a word for it. What does prayer look like for you, Dan?
Man, deep, deep, deep. I don't have a specific move. I think for me, it's just, I probably find the most peace and kind of opportunity for prayer, if you want to pray with a capital P, is when I'm at Mass, when I'm at going to Mass. I think it's just because of, again, my background, my upbringing, it's so, the Catholic faith is such a ritual faith, whether it's the sacraments, and we were talking about reconciliation. I mean, that's a sacrament, right? It's interesting.
Can you explain what that means for those who don't know?
Yeah, reconciliation or penance. They used to call it when I was younger. I think it was more penance than reconciliation, just an easier word to pronounce and probably understand. But reconciliation is a sacrament. So there are a number of 7 sacraments, I believe.
And what is a sacrament?
A sacrament is, wow, this is Baltimore Catechism 101 here. So Baltimore Catechism. Baltimore Catechism. I know your family was from Baltimore. I think it was because of the bishops of Baltimore, they created this catechism. And the catechism was in many ways more important than the Bible itself. That might sound like total heresy. But as a child, I grew up with this book. And we had to read from it and study it. And, who is God? Who is God? Why did God make us? Why does God love us? We had to go through all of that stuff. And by the time you graduated from, 8th grade or whatever, you kind of had to know all the basics of, the catechism.
How many are there? How many pieces?
Of the catechism? I don't know. But it's a pamphlet. I mean, it's a good-sized pamphlet that you have to study. And there's chapters that kind of develop the basics of who is God, why did God make us, why does God love us? And then from there, it just sort of takes off into much more kind of deeper things. As you get older, you experience the stuff in the back of the book, or it's exposed to you because presumably you can sort of understand and comprehend some of the more complicated aspects of the Catholic faith. But anyway, where were we? Sacraments, reconciliation. Yeah, reconciliation is one of those sacraments that's received, I think even to this day, very young. I mean, 2nd grade. I mean, you think about how old you are in 2nd grade. The concept there is you go in and, you confess your sins as a 2nd grader. I threw a rock at my friend. But, it's fine. I'm not here to bash the Catholic faith by any stretch. But, if the idea is to introduce the concept of reconciling with other people, reconciling with God, what you've done wrong, admitting what you've done wrong, and trying to do better the next time. I think that's sort of the high concept of it, but it is something to be confessed to a priest behind closed doors, because that person, the priest, is a channel to God, direct right angle from God to priest to you sitting there confessing your sins. But as children, it's so abstract. It's just, I yelled at my sister and I was mean to my mom.
How is it different as adults?
Well, that's the thing, is as adults, it really comes down to,
I yelled at my sister and I screamed at my child.
Yeah, I mean, if you develop in your faith life, no matter what faith you are, hopefully you're more sophisticated than, you've done these deeds that are wrong. And it's more about, well, what were my shortcomings? What could I have intervened? Should I have said something? Am I just, sort of watching things happen in my life, and am I not intervening?
I want to challenge you on that. How is that different?
How is that different than
I yelled at my sister and yelled at I don't remember anymore.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think as an adult, you have more obligations versus as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as an adult, if you see an injustice, whether it's an injustice on a very small scale or a big injustice, do you have an obligation as an adult to, well, hold on a second, this isn't right here, whatever that is. I think that, to me, that's part of reconciliation. That's part of it, of you have a certain responsibility as a faith-filled person to be able to recognize what's going on around you and try to correct an error. But I think it's more about your relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
It's your relationship with God in that, recognizing that God is all-seeing, all-knowing, sees everything you do, understands what you're going to do before you even do it. Knows every hair on your head. Like if that concept,
or lack thereof,
depending on who your attorney is. But hi-oh. But if that's where your bearing is, that you believe in God so fully that God knows exactly what you're going to do, and when you do it, He sees what you're doing. So if you fear God, if you live a fearful life, not fear. I'm not saying it right.
Awe.
If you live in awe and you recognize that, yes, what you're doing is in the light of day and there is nothing that you can hide from God, then, reconciliation, whether it's in the Jewish form, the Catholic form, whatever form it may be, then, it's a big part of...
So this is a lot to do on a second date. This is our second time meeting, Dan.
I'm bearing my soul to you, Shep.
Do you believe in that God?
Sure, 100%.
So God knows what you're going to do, and so what's going to happen when you're on the other side of this?
Or who's going to win the second race at Santa Anita? I would.
I know you're playing there, but do you believe that God communicates that to some people who can tune into that channel?
What? Sorry,
who's going to win? I'm trying to understand the parameters of believing in a God that is all-knowing. By the way, Jews argue the same thing.
Sure.
Here's the irony of this. The song that I'm currently working on,
okay.
100, 102, something like that.
Okay.
It talks about faith. And that led me into a whole trip about, well, what is it? So the Hebrew for faith isn't really faith. It's emunah, which belief maybe, but it often gets translated as faith. Ani ma'amin, I believe that. And that phraseology then becomes the closest thing to what Jews have as a catechism. Catechism? Am I pronouncing it right? It's Maimonides' 13 principles or 13 articles of faith. And the first one of which is Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema sha'abore yisparach shemo haya hoveh v'yeh. That the Creator, and that might not be the first, it might be the third, whatever, it's one of them. The Creator, may God's name be blessed, I'm degendering it because Hebrew's a gendered language, was, is, and will be, right? And there are a variety of other credos. And I've looked at them and I'm not sure I believe all of them, right? So one of them is that you believe that there will be Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead. Closest English, Tchias, reliving of the dead. It's not clear if it means zombies will come back to life in the form of my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, or if it means that we will meet in another life, or we will all transmogrify into some other spiritual beings and encounter each other. I don't know what it means, but I'm not sure I want to believe in it. Absolutely. But do I actually believe it? Do I believe in angels, beings with wings sitting on my shoulder saying, Shep, do the right thing here. And another one on the other shoulder saying, Shep, get up here, make a mistake. Come on, you get in trouble, you never get it. Like, do I believe that? I don't know. I mean, I want to, on some level, engage with something that we can't see. But I've never experienced it in a direct fashion that allows me to say, I believe that. I've seen too many other things that suggest otherwise, and thus I'm inclined towards skepticism on that. But I also want it. Can you hold both of those things?
Where do you seek forgiveness most from? Do you seek forgiveness from God? Do you seek it from your spouse? Do you seek it? In asking the question, I'll just answer really quickly. I think that I ask for it more. I'll say it out loud in my heart, but I'm actually seeking forgiveness from someone else. I'm not seeking it from God.
An earthly source.
I'm asking a heavenly Father or a heavenly being to please help me gain forgiveness for this particular action towards this particular person. Where do you seek forgiveness from? Where is the satisfaction come from?
I'm here.
Okay, Siri or whoever.
God is in your Apple Watch. That's really freaky.
Wow, how'd you do that, Shep?
I'm here.
I'm here.
Who do you seek forgiveness?
I can't do that.
I am the Lord
and
your
now
God.
God is telling me he can't.
It's like Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
I am the Lord your God.
Exactly.
Where do I seek? Yeah, I would say almost 10 times out of 10, it's from somebody who is in my immediate orbit, a person, right? It's my wife, it's my kids, it's my parents, it's Brent, it's whatever. But it's not, that's not my bearing. I mean, I'll be perfectly blunt with you guys. I'm not necessarily geared that way all the time. I'm not saying never, but.
Not geared that way as in asking God for forgiveness.
I'm not a get down on my knees and ask God for forgiveness of things that I've done to somebody else or shortcomings that I have. It's just it's not who I am. I mean, I don't know. I'm just being perfectly honest with you. It's just not my immediate.
You go to God with requests?
No.
Really?
Well, hold on. Let him. It's his truth.
I know. I'm very curious because I would have thought the opposite.
Rarely.
As someone who believes in God.
Yes.
Why?
Yeah, I knew that was coming. It's not that I wouldn't, and it's not that I haven't. It's just that it's not. I wouldn't say it's a regular thing for me. Now, when I'm at Mass, do I pray? And are there moments? So I was an altar boy, just little known facts here, for about, 8 or 9 years when I was younger. So I was on the altar with the priest. And there's a prayer that the priest prays as he's preparing for the Eucharistic aspect of the Mass.
Do you want to explain what the Eucharist is?
So the Mass is divided into several parts, and one of the parts is the Eucharist. So they prepare the table. So a single host is brought to the altar as that's just it. It's just unleavened bread. It's a little cracker. And during a portion of the Mass, the priest says a certain number of prayers. The audience participates. The congregation participates. And there's a moment when in the Catholic faith, it's called transubstantiation. Okay, you familiar?
I am.
So this is the moment when Catholics believe that God himself essentially is.
Hold on, I just have to explain to everyone. When Dan said God himself, there was a little shoulder shrug and
he looked
holding out the hands like, I don't really know what that means, but I'm just explaining.
I'm a lay person
And
here.
a glance skyward.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
very important.
Blessed be God forever. So if I'm misstating this, forgive me, but I'm not a scholar. But it's essentially a point at which the cracker becomes the embodiment of Jesus himself.
And this is why when at the end of Mass, Catholics go down the aisle and essentially they make God part of themselves by ingesting the wafer.
Right.
And drink some wine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is also
Blood of Christ, right?
Which is also blood of Christ. But there's a prayer that the priest says. He used to, many years ago, it was said almost like under his breath, but now it's said a lot more loudly, which I don't know why, but he said, and the altar server pours water into a tiny bowl over the priest's hands, and the priest says, "Lord, wash away my iniquities, cleanse me of my sins."
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it's a moment of cleansing. It's a ritual cleansing of the fingers, and then he wipes his fingers, and then he goes back to completing that aspect of the Mass. So anyway, I don't know how we got on that, but what were we talking about? Oh, making requests to God. So I would say, during Mass is probably where, over my life, is where I probably prayed the most, because I'm in a reflective mood. I'm in a reflective mode. I'm among people who are also praying. It's part of the ritual of coming back after receiving the Eucharist. You kneel. Traditionally, you kneel. Now people stand. I don't know why, but I kneel because it's a sign of reverence.
Mm-hmm.
And you bow before God, and you just close your eyes, and there is no prayer. There's no recitation of anything. It's just in the moment. Just be quiet. Just be still. Be with yourself. Be with God. Be with the people that are around you. So that's how I am. But I'm not very regular when it comes to Brent might even be more regular when it comes to prayer even than I am. I don't know. But it's a very private thing.
I want to expand your world a little bit.
Go for it.
Let me rephrase that. I don't want to expand it. I want to make you an offer that has the potential to expand your world.
I'm open.
You're driving down the 10.
Yeah.
Okay. For those who are listening to this, that's a freeway in Los Angeles. You make that turn from the 10 onto the 1 just as the sunset is hitting, and you see this gorgeous sunset in the winter with the candy-colored orange and blue and purple. Like, we missed it tonight in Oxnard, but every night in the winter is just outrageously stunning here.
Sure.
When you have that sharp intake of breath and say, "Oh my God, that's beautiful," is that a prayer?
I think for me, it's a realization. It's a affirmation, a realization that God is present. I guess.
So I'm sorry. This is my construct. This is a very Jewish construct.
Go for it.
It may be other religions too. And look, oversimplifying.
Right.
It is my view that Catholicism, Dutch Reform, Baptist, Lutheran, Church of Christ, Haredi Judaism, Modern Orthodox Judaism, Conservative Reform, Islam, Buddhism, Hindu, and on and on and on, are all technologies to achieve the same thing, and that is to connect the little people, us, to something greater than ourselves. For some people, like my wife, God is in the community, capital the, just like the one, it's the community. She's not necessarily going to appreciate a God that's outside of us. And I don't need to persuade her of my belief. Like, that's where she finds God. For me, I find God in there's some great Hebrew around this. In discussing people who have a meal together. This is something that's part of ethics of our forebears, our ancestors, Pirkei Avos. The rabbis give all these aphorisms, ethical statements. And so they say, two people who have a meal and don't discuss words of Torah, that's God's Torah, God's word, God's concepts,
word of God.
Right? It's as if they are doing zivchei mesim, the sacrifices of the dead. But two people who sit and have a meal and words of Torah come between them, they discuss Torah, hashchina shruya beinehem, the God, parenthesis, remember I was telling you gendered, God's feminine aspect, right, is connecting them, is between them, is engaged in the conversation with them. So simply by talking about God stuff, God is in our midst. God's in that microphone, is on this table, is in the air around us in this room.
That's what I learned as well. Wherever two or more are present,
so this is
God is there.
It's a direct commonality between Judaism and Catholicism.
Right. A prayer group is literally two people talking.
Beautiful.
It doesn't have to be 1,000 people on a hillside. I think that was the teaching of Jesus, which was like, okay, enough of it. We don't need to have a formal whatever it is. That this was just part of, what I learned was it can be intimate. It should be intimate. It's not always going to be intimate, but when it's intimate, sometimes that's the best. But I can understand where people, because I think there's certain people in the Catholic faith. I think there's a lot of people in other faiths, the Christianity, that feel like, and not to knock, but just, the community doing good works, volunteerism, that's enough. Okay. And that's a representation of God. True. But for some people, seeing a sunset is a manifestation of God. Some people dive deeply into science and the universe. And there's so much more now. We could do a whole thing on that because there is so much more that we know now, even in the last 5-10 years.
That's 5 months.
5 months.
Yeah.
That we've seen and that we know. But people 50 years, 100 years ago, never mind 1,000 years ago or 2,000, they had not even the remotest inkling of facts about our makeup. Why are we here? What is the chance that we're even here, sitting here right now?
Right.
The number, you couldn't even write the number. It'd take you 6 lifetimes to write the number. But think about that. I mean, if you reflect upon that, and why are we here? What are we doing here?
Yeah, I think those questions and making those connections, this is what I'm tying it back to. I'm going to argue, and this is why I say it's a very Jewish thing, that each of those is a prayer. It's enough to just recognize the beauty in that moment, the complexity of our bodies, and say, okay, I acknowledge by saying, oh God, or wow. That acknowledgement in and of itself connects you to that which is greater than yourself and is a prayer.
Shep, start with you. What is something that you've had to really dig deep down in your heart to forgive for?
Wow.
I mean, maybe you don't want to.
No. I have a long list, so I have any number of possibilities. There are former business partners that I've forgiven. There are friends that I've forgiven. And I'm not going into details lest I embarrass other people, but there was information withheld from me that I felt was important on which I'd made decisions. When you face that position, there's level one, like the baseline is you feel embarrassed because you've been made a fool of. Right? Because you've made decisions, you've made statements based on falsehood, and now you feel like a moron. But that's like the lowest level. Then there's like the values piece. How could you keep this important information from me? I needed to know this about you, about us, about our relationship. And that could be true with your best friend. It could be true with your kids. It could be true with your spouse. That was the hardest thing for me to forgive. I forgave because I am oriented toward that. I grew up with my father not talking to his brother, with my mother not talking to my father's sister, with that sibling not talking to another, with them not talking to their kids. Like, I hate that. And my cousin Dasi taught me a lesson in that context when our fathers were not talking to each other. And she said, just because they're fighting doesn't mean we have to. And from that day on, I made it my mission to always get on even in conflict. Doesn't mean I executed well, but it's been a high value of mine. So if truth is an important value of mine, so is peace. Because in Hebrew, shalom, peace, also means wholeness. If you are in conflict with someone and not at peace, you are not whole. So how can you have conflict with someone? How can you not forgive? And it ties very much back to Jesus has turned the other cheek, which is very close to, and I don't forget the aphorism, but Hillel, many of Jesus's sayings are very much related to, if not identical in some respects, to the teachings of Hillel, who is also about forgiveness, who was about, in fact, turning the other cheek.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the earth.
And that's a reference to Aaron, right? Aaron went so far as to lie to people to get them to make peace with each other.
The hardest thing I have not yet forgiven. I have a family member, not immediate. I have a family member who went through a bad divorce and tried to play the victim with my parents. And he wasn't the victim, and he extracted some money from my parents that they really couldn't afford, but gave it to them. And then I think he squandered it. And it really, to this day, bothers me immensely.
Which part?
It bothers me that he just went underground, never bothered to, after all these years and time and maturity, to come back and say, you know what, I was wrong. That was really stupid. Here's the whatever, the number of dollars it is. I mean, it's not about the money. It's the principle of the thing that I feel like my parents were taken advantage of. We all kind of were, you know. There's a part of me to this day that I want to find him, not because I want to confront him, but because I just want to know what's going on in his life. And I feel like, okay, enough time has passed. I mean, that was almost 15, 17 years ago. That's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
He's different. Everybody's different. He was younger. He made some bad decisions. I don't know. The whole thing was just a mess. It was just a mess. Nothing good comes out of situations like that. But yeah, that's one thing that still to this day bothers me. I'd like to reconcile with my cousin. I don't have many cousins. I don't have a lot of family in that way. So I feel like I need to reconcile with him, and I probably will. I don't know what's stopping me, though.
Can we offer you the blessing of doing so?
Maybe today is the day.
When do you want to call him by?
Today is my turning point. I could probably find him. I probably could find him.
Okay.
He's been not wanted to be found for quite a while, but I could probably find him. But that does bother me. But the fact that it bothers me tells me that, okay, you know, and I don't know that anybody else in my family is going to want to do that. But for some reason, it's just something that
it's about Dan's truth.
It's on my list. It's on my list of things to just set right, you know.
Good for you. How about you, Brent?
Okay. Well, you both have been so intimately involved in my life. I think for me, it was a matter of infidelity in a previous relationship. And that's something that I actually have forgiven. I've actually moved on from it. It doesn't bother.
But it was hard.
Yeah, it was in the moment, and for quite some time it was very hard. But that was a difficult one. But I have to say I've so come to peace with it, and it's not something that bothers me. But there was something that you said when I first asked you the question, which I think is an important part of it, is when somebody omits information. And the way that it was explained to me, the infidelity was like, well, I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you that I was having this relationship that I did not tell you about. And I just
distinction without a difference.
And that drove me berserk, because I was like, how can you justify it that way? Anyways, so I'll let you wrap it up.
Well, first of all, thank you both for coming with such open hearts, and may you not need forgiveness, but if you need it, that you get it quickly. Thanks so much for listening. Special thanks to Emil Stern and E. Rose for their help in producing this episode, and to Jessica Hanna DeHart for her help in social media. Please post your comments, subscribe, but most important, I hope our conversation inspired you in some way. On the next episode of The Rest is Commentary, I'll be talking with Mitchell Honig, a family friend, medical student, and a lone soldier who served in the IDF. We discuss Mitchell's experiences as a lone soldier and reservist, the importance of writing letters and sending drawings to soldiers to help them keep up their spirits, different perspectives on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict before and after October 7th, the complexities of protecting both Israeli and Arab residents in volatile neighborhoods, recognizing the humanity of soldiers, those they serve and those they come into conflict with, and so much more. Please join us.